Welcome to From the Pastor's Heart. I'm Pastor Patrick, and today on From the Pastor's Heart, you'll be hearing from Pastor Paul Gay, our executive pastor, as he shares straight from the heart.
Good morning, brothers and sisters. Just wanted to get together with you this morning for a little while to kind of tell you a little bit about this recent mission trip that we went on to Guatemala and kind of tell you my experiences from that. Now, I've been on a mission trip before to Indonesia. It was a differently structured trip when I went to Indonesia. And so I was very familiar with, the kinds of things that you would see when you go into a third world country. I was familiar with the fact that it wasn't going to be like it is in the United States, and that there's going to be a lot of poverty, there's going to be a lack of infrastructure, that kind of stuff. I was already understanding those things and comfortable with those things. But this was our first time to go to Guatemala and to be able to minister there in Guatemala. And some of my thoughts about missions, of course, here at Crane Eater is that Crane Eater has always been a mission-minded church. We built a church in Mexico back in the early 1920s. And even though Crane Eater was very small and didn't have a lot of resources, they were able to raise the funds to go build a church in Mexico. So it's always been a mission-minded church. And so we have now taken the thought process of not just global missions, always abroad in other countries, but also local missions. And we do things locally here around Crane Eater in the Redbud community and other places in Calhoun to minister to the mission that is around us, that is close to us. But there are missions that we need to think about and involve ourselves with abroad, globally in the world. And the reason I say this is because I believe we were challenged both globally and as a church body of Christ and individually by the Lord. In Matthew chapter 28 and verse 19, he says, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." So the clear directive here is that we had to go. We need to go locally outside the walls of our church, and we need to minister in the mission fields right around us, the homeless, our schools and our children, as well as those that need medical assistance. And we're involved in those things locally, but he was also telling us to go globally. Now, that doesn't mean that every individual has a call of the Lord to become a full-time missionary in a foreign country. But we can't use that as an excuse not to involve ourselves at all in this directive in Matthew chapter 28 and verse 19. He does tell us to go. Sometimes it's just a week-long trip like we took to Guatemala, and there's different things that the missionaries ask us to do when we show up. But they always want us to experience the person-to-person relationship with people in that country, whether it's, in this case, we were going to the Toca School, which is a school for children. They can't get the kind of government education that we provide in the United States. And so they're providing education for these children free of cost, and they provide them a meal once a day, which sometimes is the only meal these children get. And so they want you to relate to those children or to the adults and the people that you interact with. Now, we do physical things. We do, in this trip, we had many physical things we were doing. We were painting walls for them. We were pouring concrete, making forms to help them in their infrastructure of the school, which is a great blessing to them as well. But the missionaries, Mike and Mary Bruce, always interject time for us to relate to the children, relate to the teachers that are making great sacrifices to teach these children, and that we could connect with them on a spiritual basis. And that's really what the Lord was talking about here, that even as we do go and we do these kinds of works in the mission field, that we also have opportunities to disciple the people. We have a requirement. He said, "And make disciples of all nations." Help make them followers of the concept of Jesus Christ, the precepts that Jesus Christ taught, his teachings, and have them adapt those and follow those in their life. As for all of us, we do a whole lot better in this life when we follow the teachings of Jesus Christ as closely as we can and as best that we can. So this is a very important thing, I think, for all of us and for our church to be involved with. So right now we support several missionaries. When I say we, I mean people in our congregation are supporting missionaries individually on their own. And we also support two mission efforts right now, global mission efforts, which one is, of course, the Toka School in Guatemala, and the other one is GOA in Africa, and so in Kenya. So we are supporting both of those, and actually next year in 2025 we're planning a trip to go to Kenya with another mission team. And it's a great opportunity for you as individuals of the congregation in the church or friends of the church to be involved in global missions. As I said, you don't have to have a calling to be a full-time missionary, but you can volunteer to go and use the skills, use the gifts that God has already given you, and use them to go abroad in a mission trip. I was reminded that while we were on this trip, I was speaking with Mike Bruce, and he's the missionary that started this effort of the Toka School in Guatemala, up in Flores, Guatemala. And he had went to a conference of missionaries. And in this conference, they had probably 200 or 300 missionaries that had gathered together, and they were learning from each other and telling of experiences and things that work and things that don't work. And as they were discussing it, one of the administrators asked the question of the missionaries. He said, would you like for a mission team to come from the churches in America to help you with your mission, wherever you may be? And one of the missionaries got up to speak, and he said he definitely did not want any mission teams to come to him from the United States or from churches. And some of the reasons that he said that was because to the missionary on his side of this equation, they have to help coordinate the travel, the logistics, where you're going to put them, where they're going to sleep, how you're going to transport a team of 10, 15, 20 people. There's a lot of logistics to it, and a lot of people show up, and they have not done their homework, and they're thinking it's going to be like America, and then they're disappointed, and he has to deal with that. And he said, look, just don't send any to me. It's too much of a distraction from what I'm trying to do in this country. But then Mike Bruce got up, and he said, well, let me pose this in a little different fashion. And he asked these 200 plus missionaries, how many of you actually received your call to be a full-time missionary while you were on a church mission trip, like a short-term trip? And 90% of the missionaries raised their hands. And he said, and that is exactly why we need churches to send mission teams to the field, is because in most cases, that's where people, if the Lord is leading them to become a full-time missionary of some type, that his calling on their life really starts to formulate on that mission trip. And so I highly recommend for anyone that can to figure out a way to budget in your own budget, raise funds along with the church, and take advantage of any opportunity you have at least one time in your life to go to the mission field and experience what Jesus really meant when he said, go and make disciples throughout the earth and throughout the world and to all nations. So we have a requirement of the Lord to do it, and this mission trip was just another example of that. Now, this is the second year that Crane Eater has sent a team down there, and there were things that happened on this trip that was different than the first trip, even though some of the team members were the same. And that's the way it will be when you do a short-term mission trip. They're not always going to be exactly like the one you did the last time. And so this one had a couple of things that were different. First, they had bought some property from a generous donor that was a member of the first trip. And when they did buy that property, since we have been gone for over a year, they built a wall around it. Every place there has a walled compound for security. Crime is very high, and so people have to provide for their own security because they just don't have enough of a police force to help protect everybody's belongings. So they build walls around the compounds. And so they were having a dedication service there of that new property and making sure as soon as they got the walls put up, the lot's not even been leveled on the inside yet. They wanted to dedicate it to the service of the Lord. And so they asked us to participate in that dedicatory service, and they gave me an opportunity to preach the first message that was ever preached in that compound in Guatemala. And I appreciate the missionary Mike for allowing me to do that. That would have rightfully been his place to have done that. But, you know, he is a passionate soul for the mission of the people. And he knows that these kinds of opportunities make a big difference, not only to the people there, but also to the mission teams that are coming. So we were able to have a service there. Now, it goes without saying that Guatemala in the summer, Guatemala year-round, is a hot, humid place. The humidity is much higher than it is here in Georgia. The temperatures can be very extreme. The Lord shined on us, and they were actually mild while we were there, just in the high 80s and low 90s. But they have reached as much higher than, and especially the real field, it could be over 120 degrees on any given day. So it was hot. We were under tents, which trap a lot of heat sometimes, and it looked like it was cloudy and stormy because they have pop-up rainstorms all the time in Guatemala. But we prayed and we asked God to stay the storms while we were out in this compound.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of From the Pastor's Heart. Pastor Paul has been sharing with us about his recent mission trip to Guatemala. Join us next week as he continues to share from the pastor's heart.